he has the knapsack around his person, and that he apparently is planning on egressing through the aft stairs with the money knapsack around him and two of the shoes.
In 1971, a mysterious man named D.B. Cooper hijacked a Boeing 727, collected $200,000, and parachuted into the night, vanishing forever. More than 50 years later, the case remains unsolved. Or does it? Recently declassified FBI files reveal they investigated one suspect far more seriously than the public ever knew, even pursuing his family's DNA. Then in 2022, an aviation investigator discovered something on that suspect's family property. Despite having closed the case years earlier, the FBI took that something, examined it for over 2 years, and then returned it without revealing what they found. So what did the FBI actually find? Why did they keep it hidden? And how much of the D.B. Cooper story have we gotten wrong? Let's find out. On November 24th, 1971, a passenger calling himself Dan Cooper walked into Portland International Airport and paid $20 cash for a one-way ticket to Seattle. He wore a dark suit under a black raincoat, carried a briefcase, and a mysterious paper bag whose contents have never been identified. We'll come back to that detail later. Once airborne, he ordered a bourbon and soda, lit the first of several Raleigh cigarettes, and handed flight attendant Florence Schaffner a note. Flight attendants are used to men hitting on them, so she assumes it's a phone number and pockets it. But he leaned in. "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Inside his briefcase were red cylinders, wires, and a battery. He calmly demanded $200,000 in $20 bills and 4 parachutes, not just 2. This already revealed how calm and prepared he was by implying he might take a hostage with him. He made sabotage too risky while quietly securing a backup for himself. For about the next 2 hours, Flight 305 circled above Seattle while the ransom was assembled from Seattle First National Bank. Passengers were told there was a minor mechanical issue. Most never even realized they were hostages.
I can remember her talking, and she'd get up and go to the phone, but had no clue what was going on.
So how long is this mechanical delay? Oh, yeah, there's a man with a bomb in the back of the plane. So, no beverage service. Exactly. Have a good night. The plane finally landed at SeaTac, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. On the tarmac, Cooper's plan unfolded exactly as demanded. The $200,000 and the 4 parachutes coming from 2 separate sources. 2 front reserves from a nearby skydiving school, and 2 main rigs supplied by pilot Norman Hayden, not one expert as sometimes retold. In exchange, Cooper released all 36 passengers and 2 flight attendants, trading them, one condition at a time, never once losing control of this exchange.
We have 2 of the 3 stewardesses in the car. We have 1 remaining with the individual, and he's not going to let her leave the aircraft at this time.
Only the cockpit crew and 1 flight attendant remained, Tina Mucklow. She'd already spent hours close to Cooper, making her a crucial witness.
Now he wants her to sit back there with him during takeoff and not to go forward to the first class section.
Cooper ordered the aircraft south.
He was talking about Mexico City. He's watching those people. I think if we can get them away from the airplane, then it give us a chance if we have to. If we can't get this thing to, we're all going to have to run to it.
Below 10,000 feet, flaps at 15 degrees, unpressurized, rear staircase ready to drop mid-flight.
He seems to know a little bit about an airplane. He says we'll have to go unpressurized So I don't know where he picked that up. He'll have to go below 10,000.
He understood enough about the 727 to make very specific demands, but he never handed the pilots a typed flight plan, as later retellings claim. The exact route was theirs to choose. After takeoff, Cooper prepared his parachute and then sent Tina forward into the cockpit. Just after 8:10 p.m., the instruments picked up a strange oscillation. 2 minutes later, the rear stairs supposedly kicked upwards. Ears popped throughout the cabin. When the aircraft touched down in Reno, Cooper and the $200,000 were gone. This left the FBI with two mysteries stacked on top of each other. Who was this hijacker, and did he survive the jump at all? Here's where we ask you to set aside what 50 years of stories have told you and look at this with an open mind. Start with the flight path itself. Thanks to the Victor 23 airway, a designated aerial route, basically a highway in the sky, and U.S. military radar tracking, investigators know Cooper's route with quite remarkable precision. The pressure change recorded in the cabin points to a jump window between 8:10 and 8:13 p.m. Factor in the wind that night, and his likely landing zone sits somewhere 15 to 20 miles north of the Columbia River, nowhere near Tina Bar, where a fraction of the ransom would later surface in 1980. This wasn't a man leaping into the unknown. This was a calculable jump into a findable area. Yeah, that tracks. Bet they never find me. We'll leave that there for now. The ground below may also not have been the endless wall of mountains the legend suggests. The terrain along the likely flight path appears relatively flat and closer to populated areas than is often assumed. The weather may not have been quite as apocalyptic either. Look, at altitude, conditions were brutal, but on the ground, temperatures sat around 44 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly 7 degrees Celsius, with only scattered light showers, according to National Weather Service information. Uncomfortable, certainly, but not automatically fatal. And that famous 200-mile-per-hour wind, that was the relative airflow created by the aircraft's forward speed, not the actual wind Cooper encountered once he separated from the plane. Even Cooper's footwear seems to have grown less practical with every retelling. He's often pictured jumping in flimsy loafers, yet Tina Mucklow's original description to the FBI mentions brown, ankle-length, pebble-grain shoes without laces, something closer to slip-on ankle boots than the loafers of legend. The parachutes deserve some context too. Public retellings often emphasize that one was sewn shut and unusable, making Cooper's equipment sound dangerously defective. But that was a dummy front reserve, not the parachute carrying him to the ground. His main harness supposedly didn't even have the D-rings needed to attach it. His actual rig was a military NB6 emergency parachute. Basic and old-fashioned perhaps, but reliable equipment designed to do the job. Cooper's disappearance created a blueprint, and in 1972 alone, 15 hijackers attempted variations of his plan. 5 made it into the air, opened their parachutes, and landed alive, some taking even greater risks. All of them were eventually caught, but not because the jump failed. So, if everyone who actually attempted the jump survived it, why assume Cooper didn't? Ground teams didn't reach the area until roughly 36 hours later. Plenty of time for a capable, prepared man to walk away. And there's still that mysterious paper bag. It could have held goggles or gloves or equipment for a landing or something else, not for a suicide. We simply don't know. The official story needed Cooper to fail. The evidence says he was built to succeed. By the way, all the sources for what you just heard are linked in the description below. And once you stop assuming Cooper died that night, a very different question follows. If he walked away, who was he? On February 10th, 1980, nearly 9 years after Cooper vanished, 8-year-old Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit along the Columbia River at a beach known as Tina Bar. Just beneath the sand, his hand struck something unexpected: money. 3 tightly packed bundles of badly deteriorated $20 bills still held together by the remains of rubber bands. Investigators checked the serial numbers and confirmed the impossible. Brian had uncovered roughly $6,000 from Cooper's ransom. Approximately $5,800 could still be accounted for. Promote him. What do you mean? After 9 years, the FBI's biggest lead came from an 8-year-old. Fair point. For many, the discovery became evidence that Cooper had died. Perhaps he landed in the Columbia River and drowned, and the money eventually washed ashore. But geographically, that explanation is difficult. Tina Bar sits far from Cooper's likely drop zone, roughly 20 miles away, and the 3 bundles somehow remained together while the other $194,000 disappeared completely. One person who strongly questions that explanation is Ryan Burns. He isn't an FBI investigator, but an independent researcher who spent many years and countless hours studying the case through D.B. Cooper sleuth, examining evidence and suspects, and interviewing others obsessed with this mystery. I've linked his YouTube channel and website in the description below if you want to check out more of his work. And Burns deserves some credit here. He was the first person to publicly share audio recordings from the hijacking online, making them accessible for others to examine. And Burns believes we've gotten one fundamental thing wrong. Cooper probably survived. If the money escaped the drop zone, Burns argues, perhaps Cooper did too. That doesn't prove he survived, but the cash is no obvious grave marker either. And decades later, the money produced another surprise. Scientists examining one of the recovered bills discovered microscopic river organisms known as diatoms. The species they found blooms during spring and early summer, not in November when the hijacking occurred. That suggests the money may not have entered the Columbia River on the night Cooper jumped. It appears to have encountered the water months later, or possibly even years later. So the simplest story, that Cooper fell into the river with the ransom and washed away, doesn't neatly fit the science. But the study doesn't prove Cooper personally placed the money there either. How it reached Tina Bar remains a separate mystery. So the money didn't solve Cooper's disappearance. It made it stranger. But if Cooper survived, then somewhere outside the official search area was a man capable of planning the crime, making the jump, and quietly returning to ordinary life. And another independent investigator who also believes Cooper survived thinks he knows exactly who that man was. On April 7th, 1972, less than 5 months after Cooper vanished, another man hijacked a Boeing 727. Armed with what appeared to be a grenade and pistol, he demanded $500,000, 4 parachutes, and control over the aircraft. In San Francisco, he exchanged the passengers for his demands, forced the remaining crew into the cockpit, then escaped through the rear stairs over Utah. Same aircraft, 4 parachutes, same exchange, same escape. According to Dan Greider, a retired airline captain, aviation investigator, and veteran pilot with decades of flying experience, who has also spent years researching the D.B. Cooper case, the similarities went even further. Grider has built an audience of more than 100,000 YouTube subscribers covering aviation investigations and the Cooper mystery. His channel is linked in the description below as well. Grider claims he repeated very specific details involving the refueling truck and which crew members could leave or had to remain aboard. Details, he said, were not all public after Cooper's hijacking. If true, a simple copycat explanation becomes much harder to accept. But this hijacker didn't disappear. Police found one of his parachutes near Provo. A witness then identified a local man who had previously described a foolproof plan for hijacking an aircraft. His name was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. McCoy was a decorated Vietnam veteran, helicopter pilot, demolitions expert, and experienced skydiver. His logbook reportedly recorded 39 military static line jumps and roughly 9 civilian freefalls, the experience needed for this kind of escape. But McCoy made mistakes Cooper hadn't. Investigators matched his handwriting to instructions left aboard, found his fingerprint on an airline magazine, traced witnesses back to him, and recovered $499,970 of the ransom from his home. So, he escaped with $30. That's not how this works. Technically, no. Cooper left a tie. McCoy left handwriting, fingerprints, witnesses, and nearly $500,000. He was arrested 2 days later and sentenced to 45 years. Grider believes McCoy wasn't copying Cooper. He was actually repeating his own crime, refining the plan, but executing it less carefully. If true, history's most elusive hijacker was caught because he tried it again. But the FBI rejected McCoy as Cooper. He was younger, his appearance didn't match closely enough, and none of the flight attendants identified his photograph. Grider counters that Cooper's eyewitness descriptions were themselves inconsistent, and even a flight attendant from McCoy's proven 1972 hijacking reportedly couldn't later identify him with certainty. Investigators also believe McCoy was home in Utah during Thanksgiving. For decades, that appeared to settle it. Yet, newly released records reveal the FBI continued investigating McCoy far longer and far more seriously than the public realized. The public story is simple. The FBI investigated Richard McCoy, found that he didn't match Cooper, and ruled him out. The files tell a more complicated story. Investigators compared McCoy's photograph with the Cooper sketches and showed it to multiple witnesses. None identified him. Cooper appeared older, with darker eyes and complexion, more hair, and less prominent ears. Those are serious objections. But McCoy had already proven how effectively he could alter his appearance. During his confirmed hijacking, witnesses described a man wearing a wig and makeup and a false mustache and sunglasses. Grider argues he could have used a different disguise as Cooper, along with cigarettes and bourbon, habits that contradicted his strict Mormon lifestyle. That explanation is possible. It's not proof. Still, newly released records show how seriously the FBI considered the resemblance. Agents even retouched a photograph of McCoy, adding Cooper-style sunglasses. It wasn't an identification, just investigative testing, but it shows McCoy received more attention than a quickly dismissed copycat. And that attention continued. A 2004 FBI memo shows investigators were still seeking DNA from McCoy's family 30 years after internal records said he had been eliminated. The memo acknowledged contradictions and raised the possibility that differences between the crimes represented a natural refinement of methods. In other words, investigators themselves considered what Grider now argues. Perhaps McCoy wasn't copying Cooper. Perhaps he was improving his own plan. Then there's McCoy's alibi. The FBI had statements placing him in Utah around Thanksgiving, but in a later conversation Grider secretly recorded, McCoy's sister-in-law, Denise, reportedly said Richard and his wife Karen were actually away, had said they were going to California, and left her to watch their children, potentially placing McCoy away from Provo on November 24th. That later account conflicts with the original record, but it doesn't erase it. Memories can change after decades. So McCoy's age, appearance, witness rejections, and alibi remain real problems. But the FBI's continued pursuit of family DNA reveals something equally important. Richard McCoy may have been officially eliminated, but investigators were never comfortable leaving him there. Richard McCoy's mother died first, then later his wife. Only after both were gone did his children, Shantae and Rick, finally open up to Dan Grider about a suspicion they'd apparently had for years, that their father had been D.B. Cooper. According to Grider, they'd been protecting their mother because they suspected she may have been an accomplice in both hijackings. In 2022, while visiting Richard McCoy's grave on the family's property in Cove City, North Carolina, Grider stumbled onto something unplanned. Inside an old outbuilding sat crates of forgotten gear. Inside those crates, a modified military parachute rig, a harness, and a skydiving logbook. This discovery happened unexpectedly, caught live on GoPro. To most people, it looked like old canvas and tangled straps. To Grider, it looked like evidence. The rig had no name or serial number directly connecting it to D.B. Cooper. What caught Grider's attention was its unusual stitching and modifications, which he argues resemble work associated with Earl Cassie, the rigger connected to Cooper's 1971 parachutes. Combined with McCoy's skills, the second hijacking, and the disputed alibi, Grider considers it the missing physical link. If Grider's right, this isn't just an old parachute in a barn. It's potentially the first physical object in 50 years that ties a named individual to Cooper's actual equipment. But the logbook might be the more interesting find. According to Shantae, its entries placed her father in two highly specific and highly suspicious locations, practicing jumps in Oregon in the weeks before the Cooper hijacking, and again in Utah in the weeks before his own arrest 5 months later. The FBI apparently considered it important enough to examine. According to Grider and subsequent reporting, agents met with him and McCoy's son in September 2023. They took the parachute, the harness, and McCoy's skydiving logbook. Agents also collected DNA from McCoy's son. The Bureau had stopped actively investigating Cooper 7 years earlier, but retained the material for more than 2 years. In December 2025, the parachute was reportedly returned. No public conclusion accompanied it. And that silence leaves room for very different interpretations. Grider believes the parachute directly connects McCoy to Cooper. Ryan Burns disagrees, arguing there's no verified chain of custody linking it to Flight 305, that military surplus parachutes weren't unique, and that the evidence against McCoy still outweighs the similarities. The FBI has not publicly authenticated the parachute as Cooper's, or announced a DNA match, or reopened the case publicly, or identified McCoy as the hijacker. So, did Richard McCoy do it? We can't honestly say yes. Or can we? If the parachute cannot identify Cooper, DNA might. Unfortunately, the best samples disappeared long before modern testing became possible. Cooper smoked 7 Raleigh cigarettes aboard Flight 305. Investigators collected the butts, tested them for fingerprints, and eventually destroyed them. A strand of hair recovered from his seat was preserved, but later misplaced. That left Cooper's clip-on tie. It produced partial DNA profiles, but decades of handling make it impossible to know whether any belonged to Cooper. Microscopic particles, including titanium and bismuth, suggest its owner may have worked around specialized industrial materials, possibly in aerospace or electronics. Interesting, but hardly a name. And none of it directly connects Richard McCoy to Flight 305. No confirmed fingerprint or DNA sample or ransom bill or personal possession places him aboard. Burns isn't alone in keeping the identity question open. McCoy is only one of dozens of suspects proposed over the decades. Northwest employee Kenneth Christensen became a favorite despite problems with his physical description. Dwayne Weber made a deathbed confession but lacked convincing aviation or parachuting evidence. Military veteran Robert Rackstraw attracted years of attention, but was younger than Cooper and a poor witness match. And in 2024, a community of longtime D.B. Cooper researchers and investigators held an informal tournament comparing 20 leading suspects. Skip Hall ultimately came out on top with his age, appearance, and clandestine past intriguing Cooper enthusiasts, but no physical evidence connects him to Flight 305. The point is, after 50 years, every major suspect fits part of the story and fails somewhere else. That's what makes this disagreement between Burns and Grider so interesting. They largely agree on the first mystery. Cooper could, and probably did, survive. They disagree on the second. Who walked away? Burns believed Cooper escaped and that his identity remains unknown. Grider believes Cooper escaped too, and that his name was Richard McCoy. McCoy remains unusually difficult to ignore. He had the skills, performed an extraordinarily similar hijacking 5 months later, remained under FBI scrutiny decades after supposedly being eliminated, and is now connected to a disputed parachute found on his family's property. But compelling is not conclusive. Witnesses rejected his photograph. His alibi remains contested. The barn parachute has no publicly verified connection to Flight 305, and no reliable forensic evidence places McCoy aboard. So, did D.B. Cooper survive? Currently, we can't prove it, but the jump was likely far more survivable than legend suggests. The weather wasn't apocalyptic. The terrain wasn't impossibly remote. His main parachute worked. The search started late, and every copycat who completed a comparable jump survived. The Tina Bar money doesn't prove he died either. Its location and evidence it encountered river water later only makes its journey harder to explain. Perhaps that's what we actually got wrong, expecting one dramatic clue to solve everything. The altered photograph was a comparison, not a confession. The parachute is a lead, not proof. Maybe Grider has finally found Cooper. Maybe Burns is right, that the real man is still out there, unidentified. More than 50 years later, the most honest conclusion remains the least satisfying. Cooper probably could have survived. McCoy possibly could have been Cooper. And somewhere between those two statements, a man disappeared. So what do you think? Did Cooper survive? And who was he? Let me know below in the comments. I'm Matt. This is Untold Stories. Check out the video on your screen next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you there.